everyone, you're listening to the Tea with Tanya podcast, and I'm your host, Tanya Ambrose. I'm a public health professional by day and your average tea-loving millennial and content creator by night. My goal for this podcast is to share public health stories, self-love and wellness tips to educate and empower and to promote positive living. This podcast is here to serve.
Hello. Welcome back to the Tea with Tanya podcast. Thank you for tuning in. I do appreciate your support. Now let's get into today's episode. Today we're going to be talking about menstrual health and menstruation. I know you're probably thinking, what does one have to do with the other? But I'm here to tell you, not by myself though, I'm here to tell you, there is a correlation between our mental health and menstruation. And if you don't know, I am the founder of a nonprofit organization called Scrub Life Cares, where we work towards providing menstrual health education along with different hygiene supplies for those who are in need, especially, period poverty being a thing. But that's also another podcast in itself. But I am joined by someone very special. And I know every time I have a guest on, I always say that, but all my guests are special to me because they're taking time out to join me, the tea tasting room, to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. But I am joined by a licensed clinical social worker. I like to refer to her as a daughter of the soil. If you hear an accent when you listen to my podcast, I am from the beautiful Caribbean island of Antigua. And my guest, she is affiliated or has strong ties, as we should tell us, to Antigua and Barbuda. So I am here to welcome Miss Cerene Prince. Hey, Cerene.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me. Yeah, thanks for joining me in my tea tasting room. That's what I like to call it. But, let my listeners know who you are and what you do.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm based out of New York. I'm licensed also in Florida and the state of New Jersey. I specialize in children and adolescent psychotherapy and development. I also provide services to adults. I own the Orchard Blue Counseling Services mental health company that's based in New York. We're fully virtual. I've also launched services within Antigua and Barbuda by the start of launching the 8-week initiative last year, in which I offered more affordable, low-cost mental health services to really help the existing mental providers in Antigua and Barbuda destigmatize mental health care, the idea of seeking mental health, as well as increase accessibility. And so we're now moving into the end of the year, and the company is growing, and we're hoping to continue to offer supports to those living in Antigua and Barbuda, not only the residents, but the expats and visitors, by ways of mental health counseling, as well as psychoeducation and workshops, individually and in groups.
I love that. So guys, as you can hear, she is doing an amazing thing, which is going to prompt my first question, Cerene. What exactly is mental health and why is it important? And I know that question can be it's a broad question or can have a broad answer. But the reason why I ask that, because, in today's society, everyone keeps talking about, check your mental health this, mental health that, which is amazing that we're even having the conversation surrounding mental health. But what exactly, for those who may not know exactly what mental health is or need some clarity, what exactly is mental health and why is it important for us to maintain or take care of our mental health?
Right. And that's a good question because persons oftentimes, they relate to getting over certain humps, as they may put it, or hard times by engaging in certain things. And so mental health, just like physical and medical health, is part of who you are, part of your entire being, whereas a stressful or traumatic event can cause you to feel emotions for longer periods of time that impact your day-to-day activity. So when we think about mental health, right, we're hoping that we are all engaging in activities to sustain us, to allow us to go to work, be in relationships, our self-esteem, going to school, being among others if we so choose. And then life happens, right? Things happen. And I think the pandemic is the perfect example where persons began to realize that they were experiencing symptoms of nervousness, depression, hopelessness, despair for longer periods of time, and were struggling to manage those because of some activities that were not available to them because of the restrictions surrounding COVID, or they began to realize that they've been struggling with these symptoms for so long that they've been coping under the guise of the mask of maybe overworking, misuse of alcohol, even infidelity or overeating, undereating, overly exercising. Yeah. And so that's when you talk about mental health, that's what you're talking about. You talk about mental health, then you talk about mental illness. So mental illness is when you are experiencing a symptom such as anxiety, depression, racing thoughts that are happening several times or every day out of the week that are impacting your daily functioning. So you may have difficulty taking care of yourself, brushing your teeth, maintaining your hygiene, going to work as you should, even engaging in social activities as you used to. You may feel more panic attacks or nervousness. And so that's when we start to explore mental health illness or mental illness and diagnosing if there's a illness that's impacting you. And mental health also is hereditary. And so when persons talk about high blood pressure or diabetes being hereditary, mental illness is also hereditary because it is something that impacts your brain. And so someone will say, well, they're a neurologist. And so understanding the difference between what a neurologist does, which is the functioning of your brain, and then looking at a psychiatrist, psychologist, licensed clinical social worker, a psychotherapist, a mental health counselor, and we're start looking at how these events are impacting your functioning and how you are perceiving the world around you. And that could impact actually the brain, right? The functioning of the brain to the point where the neurologist may want to look at the somatics that are going on. And sometimes the body responds to stressful events because the emotions are so intense that it just sets your body into a spin, into a spiral. And so you may start to feel physiological symptoms that seem to be unexplainable. So I know I'm giving you a very long-winded explanation.
I love it.
But as you know, my psychotherapy is rooted in holistic psychotherapy. And so I look at persons holistically and I want them to do the same so that they can have a better understanding of mental health and mental illness. And mental health is about sustaining your mental health, your wellness, at least for me. And so when I meet with clients, I share with them, we want to look at the behaviors or the thoughts, the repeating or the automatic thoughts that are impacting your ability to function the way that you want to show up in the world. And so not so much of pathologizing everything that you do or offering a diagnosis, but looking at the symptoms and also looking at acceptance. I've had clients, especially, and I think in many communities, but I can speak to Caribbean and being a descendant of Antigua and Barbuda, when someone doesn't want to go out, oftentimes they're shamed, or why you don't want to be out, why you don't want to stay with the family, or why are you leaving the party early? And really it's because they're really trying to preserve their wellness, their mental wellness oftentimes. And so someone may say, well, I want to go out more. And I'll ask them, well, do you? Because not wanting to go out more is, it's okay, right? It's just really about how it's impacting your functioning and being accepting and loving of who you are, even in a space that may not culturally be accepting of that.
And I'm glad you say that, because sometimes even myself, even I struggle with, not wanting to go out and then thinking, feeling guilty for choosing myself. It's not that I don't necessarily want to go out, but in a particular moment, you just want to have time for yourself at home in the comfort of your home. But then sometimes I oftentimes feel, guilty for telling a friend, oh, I don't want to go out today. And then I end up going, just because of all of that sheer guilt of not wanting or not respecting my needs, So I'm happy you said that.
And things like that, it actually triggers, it makes the symptom worse.
Yep. I've been noticing that. It's like, why can't I personally, from my personal experience, I like saying standing in my truth. It doesn't mean, why do I have to feel guilty for saying no?
Mm-hmm.
Protecting my peace. Oh, you're so boring, or you're not fun anymore. But it's like, no, we're evolving, and then, as they say, I don't know. Apparently, I don't know when this happened, but I don't know. And, sometimes you just want to protect your peace or your space. So that shame that I can only imagine what others, may feel dealing with situations like that.
Yeah.
But I do want to ask, like I said, we're talking about menstruation and mental health, but how does one relate to the other? I know we have, I guess you can probably touch on PMS or premenstrual syndrome, but how does our period, in a sense, affect our mental health? Us as women or menstruators, how having a period can have an effect on our mental health?
Yeah. Going back to looking at yourself holistically, having a menstruation involves hormones. And we know very well that when we even experience a mental health condition like depression, our brain releases certain hormones throughout our body, oftentimes increasing that. But not only that, the hormones involved in menstruation in itself can produce, because it's preparing, right? Your body's preparing you for something. It's preparing you to be nurturing, right? Or possibly it's preparing you to conceive, because that is part of menstruation. Feel free to chime in whenever. And so when it's doing that, it needs you to be in an emotional space. It needs you to be in a physical space and engage in certain activities, right? And so when you include going to school, going to work, and any stress that may be involved, or just really life stress, studying, preparing for a project or a presentation, or there's certain expectations of you, you are sort of pushing against the preparation that your body is trying to do for you, and or the stress that you're experiencing is also increasing those hormones. So you may be experiencing, let's say, for example, some persons express that they're feeling sad, or, that they are crying. And so those emotions are very natural emotions. It's not so much that you shouldn't feel them. It's just a matter of your day-to-day life and how it can exacerbate or increase those emotions to the point where it makes functioning a little bit more difficult. And then you attach any mental health conditions or mental illness that a person may be struggling with, and those combined can really send someone into a deeper despair. And when we're talking about menstruation, we want to be mindful of that. We want to be mindful of when our period is coming. And not everyone knows that, because not everyone's body, has their menstruation on a timely basis. Some persons are out of whack if you have PCOS or any other hormonal related condition. You may not always know that, but you do know just from this podcast and others that you want to engage in certain activities that definitely will put your body at ease. You want to engage in also healthy eatings, so that when you are having those cravings for bread, because I love bread, when you're having cravings for bread or comfort food, is not overwhelming you because you've already have the nutrients. And so I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm not going to go into the whole eating thing and what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. I'm speaking as a psychotherapist. And if I was meeting with a client, I would say, well, how are you balancing all of these things? How are you introducing healthy foods that you can eat into your life? And who are you meeting with to decide what that is? Because there are some fruits that are very high in sugar. And if you are managing your glucose level or diabetes, they're probably not fruits that you should eat, but you're thinking I should eat these fruits because it's going to make you healthy, and it's not. And then it worsens those conditions, and those conditions impact your mood during your menstrual cycle.
That I found this statistics in a sense on Mayo Clinic, where it says it's estimated that as many as 3 of every 4 menstruating women have experienced some form of premenstrual syndrome. And I know that, there are many different symptoms of PMS, but I want to talk about the emotional and behavioral signs. For me, and I can be transparent for a second. My last, I want to say 2 or 3 cycles, I don't know what has been happening in this world, but my mental health or my emotions has always been or have been out of whack every time it's almost time for my period. I've never had that issue when I was younger, but as I'm getting older, I'm feeling more tense, so my anxiety is on a level that I didn't even know existed. Well, I'm always a crier, so I can't really add the crying because I cry for every single thing, especially when it comes to a TV show or movie. But I'm just a natural cry. But definitely, I have more mood swings, more irritable, or the simple, basic things would get me, angry, sleeping. I don't sleep well, or I go to sleep super early and I'm up by, let's say, midnight, or, poor concentration even when I'm at work. So what are some ways we can cope or check ourselves when we notice our mood is shifting? Because, of course, we know the hormone levels are fluctuating, but what are some ways in which those who are menstruating and those, see that they have some sort of change in their mood or something related to their mental health? What are some ways we can cope or check ourselves when we notice that our mood is shifting?
Yeah, definitely embrace it. Sometimes persons are saying, I don't know why I feel this way. I don't want to feel this way. Well, embrace it, because you want to be mindful of where are these emotions coming from. Are they coming from something that's going on in my life? And or is this coming from my body preparing me for a menstrual cycle? Well, first is conception, and then a menstrual cycle, because it doesn't happen. Emotions tend to not just happen the day of your menstrual cycle. They're usually happening a week before. And so you definitely want to engage in breathing exercises and meditation. If you are religious or spiritual, perhaps listening to a song or a song that is uplifting and guiding you. You want to engage in exercises that are not strenuous. So that may involve Zumba, yoga, things, activities that will help your muscles relax. And you may say, well, Zumba doesn't make your muscles relax, but it gets your heart racing, but it's also enjoyable. You may enjoy the music of Zumba that surrounds it, or even Afro Zumba. Journaling is important. Journaling is going to help you connect with what you're feeling and what you're thinking, and so that you can process those things so that you are not feeling overwhelmed with emotions and is impacting you in any way, and whether you're engaging in certain areas of your life. I think it's also important to sit with it. Sometimes we have to sit with it when and we can. I know some persons are caregivers, whether they're mothers, they are primary caregivers or caregivers of their parents. But when you can, whether it's for 10 minutes or a half hour, sit with it, right? And find ways that you can express yourself and express those emotions. So if you need to sit with it and cry it out, cry it out. If you need to call someone and just talk about what's going on in your mind, do that. but I do not encourage necessarily suppressing it. But I don't also want someone to stay in it for longer periods of time if they're dealing with mental health. But bringing yourself to awareness and accepting it is really important, at least from, a clinician standpoint. And then manage it. So I do something called tapping. And so tapping really is a Chinese, it's like you're tapping your acupressure points, and it is really based in ancestral practices. You may read up, and they may say that it's based in Chinese medicinal practices, but it's a compilation of those things, right? And so you may want to tap. And so when I speak to clients about tapping, Caribbean clients, that is, I would share with them, remember when your mom and your grandmother may have put like accolado on a piece of cloth and you place it on your head. And so they didn't necessarily have a wording for it. If your stomach was hurting you, you got the rag on top of your head. If your foot was hurting you, they rub it down and maybe you got the rag on your head. But that's because your central nervous system is connecting to the areas of your ailments and trying to ease those physiological pains or upsets. And that goes the same thing for mental health. I've had clients, of course, many of those that looked at me like I was crazy. And I would discuss tapping with them. I'll send them the video. And, they're like, I don't know, this is not for me. I'm Black or whatever. And each and every one of them who tried it because they were emotionally dysregulated. They said they were just crying for no reason. They were crying for a reason and just really was overwhelmed or experiencing a panic attack. When they tapped, they came to me and said, I don't know what it is, but it worked. And it really, and I share that not necessarily for everyone to do tapping, and you can explore it. It's called the Tapping Solutions, but just really to understand that you do have some ability to help yourself manage those emotions while also still exploring and speaking with a therapist, but it's available to you, right? It's really inherited. If I would, I would say that it is part of your being, and you do have the ability to sort of help yourself manage these symptoms and do the healing. And so when you're talking about menstruation, these practices or these methods can be very helpful. Yeah. And I know that some persons, they're like, look, I have a lot of cramps. I'm in a lot of pain. And so I ask them, do you self-massage? Right? Self-massaging yourself, sometimes massaging your feet or your fingers. Those are part of, the acupressure points. And it can send, it sends like a sensory or message to different parts of your body to help ease these emotions, or just even massaging your stomach and just speaking positive affirmations to yourself to help yourself soothe.
And even I want to add a little bit when it comes to repeating or saying the positive affirmations, because sometimes I know for me in the past, years ago, I would say an affirmation, but I was just saying it because it was a thing to do. But we have to actually believe the words that we are saying, in order for us, I think, to see a change. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, because sometimes
no, absolutely,
but you have to believe and make that change happen as well for yourself. Don't just believe that because I'm saying, oh, I am whatever you're gonna say, that means it becomes what it is at the same time. So I think that's if you can clarify that part, because sometimes I think it's probably you who I saw posted it on your Instagram story, if I can be honest here, when you said, you're all for positive affirmations, but if we're not believing the words that we're saying, how can we expect, to see a change?
Right. And so even when you're speaking affirmations, I think it's important to acknowledge what you're feeling and giving value to it. It's okay to be mad. It's okay to feel sad, annoyed, and agitated. If that's how you feel, that's how you feel. Give it a space and then add positivity to it, right? Or positive affirmations about your ability to show up differently, or whether or not the situation warrants that level of agitation or anger. Or is this a long-term situation, or is it short-term? Is it not forever? And that's how you provide these positive affirmations for you. So let's say, for example, some of us, when we are menstruating and we're going to work, we may have experienced flipping the switch, and we may have snapped at someone, right? Because we were feeling agitated throughout the day. And so you definitely want to engage in some meditation, after positive affirmations about the environment that you're in or the situation that you're about to go into. And it may involve, that this is just for a short period of time, or I can get through this, right? I have the ability to get through this. I'm angry, but I have the ability to get through this. Or I'm agitated and I have the ability to get through this.
Right. That's I'm hoping you guys listening, you hear Mr. Cerene Prince and definitely put that into practice. But shifting gear a little bit, even though we're still talking about mental health and menstruation, period poverty, which many of you probably listen may have heard about it by now, but I'll just read it from the medical news today. Period poverty is a lack of access to menstrual products, education, hygiene facilities, waste management, or combination of these. It affects an estimated 500 million people worldwide. People who experience period poverty are unable to purchase the menstrual products they need, and in many cases, this means that they cannot go to school or work or even participate in daily life. And the reason why I'm bringing period poverty in, Cerene, because, again, that's one part of the work that I do as well. But the other day, I went to the grocery store to get me, some pads because it's that time. And a pack of pad that contained 20 was like 15, I think 1586 or some. I almost fell out. I almost fell out. And I'm like, I would like to think, I'm a little bit, I don't want to say privileged, but I'm in a position where I should be able to just pick up a pack of pads and move on without thinking, oh my God, it's $15 for a pack of pad. But I was like blown away. I was like, what in the world? I had to call my sister to ask her if I'm going crazy or is this store, should I go to another store? And I bring that up because not many people are able or have the means to buy their period products that they need, right? Sometimes we're having to choose between, do I want to buy something to eat for me and my family, or am I going to go and buy my pads that I'm going to need because I'm going to be bleeding or I'm going to be menstruating in the next few days? And that's really a tough thing that many people are dealing with, or because you don't have enough pads or, whatever items that you may use, you have to stay home from work or school because, again, you just can't afford to buy these items. So do you think, well, I think we know the answer, but how does period poverty affect mental health?
Yeah, in New York City, persons may think that, it's, if you don't make it here, you don't make it anywhere, and that there are resources everywhere. And there are resources, and then there's not enough. And so it really impacts a female gender-born or a woman from going to school. If they don't have access to the natural resources to allow them to be in society in a way that they can show up without, messing up their clothes, so to speak, they won't enter it. And then that impacts how they feel about themselves. Just having poverty alone is enough. And when we're talking about poverty, period poverty, it doesn't even relate to someone that's in poverty either. A middle income person may not be able to afford $15 of sanitary napkins. And we all know when you buy the cheaper ones, you get what you pay for. And so if you have a heavy cycle, it's all over the place most times, right? Also, if you don't have the ability to drive, let's say, to a chain store, right, that may have it for cheaper, you won't have access to it. So in New York City, if you're living in the inner city, you're going to the bodega, right? Or if you are living somewhere like in Long Island, there aren't bodegas within walking distance. And when I say walking distance, I'm talking about a quarter of a mile. And if you have your menstrual cycle, today you wake up, let's say today is in the morning, you see your period comes, you have a heavy menstrual cycle, you can't afford sanitary napkins, you're not going to school most times, right? If you have an exam for school, you just missed the exam. You miss the exam, you possibly are failing the class. And so it also then impacts how they feel about themselves. If they're smart, they may start to have these automatic thoughts about themselves as to whether or not they have the ability to be in a certain class, or even when they're thinking about college education, as a teen, you're thinking so far beyond. Because in the now, you don't have an answer, and you don't have access to essential menstruation products. Then how are you're looking at yourself in the future, then how are you going to achieve these goals? And that in itself is so daunting, right? It's so daunting to someone. And it presents a barrier to someone's greatness. And it shouldn't even be allowed. Having to spend that amount of money on sanitary napkins should not be allowed. Someone has a heavy menstrual cycle, that means they're spending $30. That is ludicrous.
Mm-hmm. Can you imagine how much you can spend with just one cycle, especially if you have a heavier flow? So it does, again, affect our mental health, because we got to choose, can we participate in these activities, with our friends? Which brings me back to what I would have mentioned earlier about not, when you're saying no, that you can't do something and you feel guilty. So can you imagine adding your period to that, and the reason why you can't enjoy life, as we call it, during that time is because, you generally can't afford. You got to make sure that you're saving, your sanitary items just for,
And so also, like, if you're in school, not every teacher or school setting will be receptive of that, right? The schools should be budgeted to supply such needs. I remember when I was in high school, there used to be that silver hard whatever thing, and it used to have sanitary napkins in it. And then you had to pay 25 cents. I said, well, if people can't afford it, why are you asking for money for the sanitary napkins? Hello, doesn't make any sense. But it should be something that's stored in the nurse's office, right? And not just one pad, but an entire pack. And so, when you think about a student or someone who's working, if they have a male, supervisor or a teacher, how comfortable are they to sharing that? And it just creates so many different emotions for someone that can impact their mental health and how they're showing up in different spaces.
That is so true. Now we're going to take a spin a little bit to some questions that I'm sure if you're a parent, sister, aunt, whatever you are, you're listening to this podcast, you're probably wondering, why are they talking about periods, or how can I prepare to talk about menstruation or periods to my young child? So as you work closely with the adolescents, and sometimes there's an argument, sometimes thinking, at what age do we talk about periods with our young girls or those who menstruate? And I know for us in my organization, Scrub Life Kids, we were wrestling with, do we start from age 11 or from 8 or 9? But then I remember when I was in high school, I had a classmate who said she was 8 years old, when she got her first period, and we were like 8 years old, again, we were young and naive then, didn't even know what was normal and what wasn't. But at what age, or how does a parent, like I say, parent, sibling, whoever you are, if you're raising someone who menstruate, how can one prepare to have that period talk, as we call it?
Depending on the developmental age, the discussion looks differently, right? And so I think it's important, I know it's important to have that discussion as early as 7 years old. You have to keep in mind, they live in a digital world.
Yes.
So they have access to information is readily available to them, and is also curtailed to their developmental age. And so they're on YouTube, and YouTube has so much information that even a 5-year-old will gain access to. So a lot of times parents, you want to get ahead or be aligned with them receiving this information because they live in a digital world. Depending on your generation, I didn't have computers to go to. I had an encyclopedia, and the encyclopedia did not, that I recall, have menstruation in there. If it wasn't worded in a way that I could understand or comprehend. It was for an adult, right? But the child encyclopedia didn't have menstruation. We had Judy Blume. And so everyone was racing to read Judy Blume, and that was their go-to, which was ridiculous. I'm like, it served its purpose then, but then, as he goes, he's like, that was not a good idea. And so now that it's not Judy Blume anymore, it's YouTube, you definitely want to have that conversation with them and normalize it, right? Menstruation is a beautiful thing. It is how we conceive oftentimes, right? Or it's just a natural part of ourselves. And it lends a lot to us. Some people are like, well, no, it doesn't, because I have horrible cramps, or, it creates all these things for me. And so we're not all created equal, right? And so as parents, caregivers, aunties, grandmothers, you definitely want to have the conversation early on in short stages, right? And so usually I believe most children will show an interest when they see a sanitary napkin. And so a parent who has a pack of sanitary napkins, pads, or tampons, the child usually is staring at it. And that is your window to talk about it. Do you know what that is? And they may say no, or they may say, oh, I seen you put it in your panty. You're like, wait a minute, you were watching me? Right? And so you may word it as, well, when you are getting older, your body starts to do things to let you know that it's preparing you for womanhood or to become an adult, right? And so they may ask questions, and allow them to ask the questions. And if they stop asking the questions, stop providing information, because they are of a younger age. And then as they get older, you will increase that information as they get older. Now, if you have an 8-year-old who's having their period, you definitely want to have a conversation with that, right? And every parent, adult, caregiver is different. Not everyone is comfortable having the conversation, because most times or sometimes someone didn't have the conversation with them. And I think before you have the conversation with them, you want to start doing some reading, right? So when you're preparing for the period talk, you want to read up on recent articles and journals on menstruation from experts and specialists, such as an adolescent pediatrician and or a GYN specializing in adolescent development. That last part is really important, because they usually see children that are younger who are having their menstrual cycle. Some parents do bring their child to a GYN to actually have that conversation together. And that's also another way I forgot to mention. And so they generally are writing articles. The digital world is also for us. Yeah. And the way that articles and journals are written, most times they're written in a way that it doesn't require a lot of time, because some, caregivers are like, I don't have time to sit down and read all that. I have so many things to do. Some things are done in video. Many of them are on TikTok and Instagram, right? And so you may want to follow them so that you can start to get that information in doses. Yeah. And you may learn some things even for yourself. I know I've learned some things in recent years about menstruation, even when I was on my fertility journey, that no one told me, or maybe research wasn't available then. Right. So you want to read research-based articles that may have, because there have been changes and there's new discoveries, right? And so having the period talk, don't assume the child or adolescent doesn't have knowledge, right? As I mentioned, with technology, information is quickly accessible. Sometimes it's curtailed for their age. 3 questions you want to have handy after you've read up about menstruation. First question is, what do you know? Ask them what do they know about periods and menstruation. Then you want to ask them, what have you been told? Because when they're in school, a lot of times kids are offering information that's incorrect, or sometimes it's correct and is advanced, and you wasn't ready for them to have that. Like Kevin says, I wasn't ready. Yeah, you wasn't ready for that. And you probably think they wasn't ready either. But it's important to know what they know already, because you can't erase it from their mind, right? And so you may want to, offer some truthful information or share with them that, I didn't realize you had that information. And so the next question is, what would you like to know? Because as uncomfortable as it could be for you to have that conversation, it could be uncomfortable for them to have it as well. And so over time, they will let you know in their own way information that they would like you to share with them. You want to keep the convo light. So, you don't want to make it like an interview, or, the second degree, right? So you want to keep the conversation light. When possible, do it while you're engaged in your normal day-to-day activities, like cleaning the house or cooking dinner, or maybe having a snack and you guys are sitting one-to-one, or yoga, or just doing your stretching for the week. If it makes you nervous, consider finding a YouTube video or books you can watch or read with your adolescent or child, right? So if you're still nervous about it, you guys can watch the video separately. So if you find a book, if you can afford it, get 2 books. Go to the library even. I know here in New York City, I'll be honest with you, some of the libraries have shut down because of the digital world. A lot persons are not using books, but there are libraries. Find out the library has 2 books and, take those 2 books out and read them together in the video. And so then when you get the books and or the video, whatever you do, have these questions handy or statements. The first one is, plan for each of you to note your comments and questions. Next, plan a meetup. Keep it light. This can be at the home, in your front backyard, maybe after school when you're picking them up, or maybe tea at a restaurant or cafe. It doesn't have to be intense. The third thing is have these similar comments and questions ready for your meetup. So when you have these comments or questions, have them. Both of you should agree to bring them to the meetup. Each of you should definitely provide feedback on the material. Adolescents love to feel as though they are knowledgeable. When they're addressed or presented as if they don't know anything, it's going to completely send them into, I shouldn't say all of them, but it could send them into a spiral because they want you to recognize that they're smart. They have book smarts and they have common sense and they do have things to learn, because I know my nieces, they teach me a lot of stuff. So, that I didn't know.
Yes, today, we think they don't know, but they do.
Yes, they do know. Even when I have the clients, they know a lot more than the parents believe that they know, even about mental health, right? Ask your child or teen, how do you think this information, this video relates to you? Or will it relate to your experience with menstruation? Because not all of it is relatable in terms of culture, right? So a child or teen in New York or in the US may find these videos relatable, whereas in Antigua and Barbuda, it may not be relatable because these resources, you don't have like large chain stores, or the conversation or the culture allows for the freedom of having these conversations, although I'm seeing that it is now.
Yeah.
Also, the last thing is, what information do you think should have been added? Ask them, what do they think should have been added in there? They have great ideas. And they can conceptualize things as well. And so it lets them know that their thoughts and ideas are valuable, right? That their feedback is valuable, that you're not talking at them, that you're talking with them. And they don't have to be adult to have that conversation. They have to be a child who you're creating a safe space to find out what they know, what they need to know, also what you may need to go find out, because they may have questions and you don't have an answer to that. And that's really okay. And maybe you're not the one to give them the answer. Maybe it's time to schedule an appointment with a adolescent pediatrician. I know I've had 15-year-olds seeing a pediatrician they were seeing since birth. And I would say to the parent, well, have you considered having them seeing an adolescent pediatrician? Like, come on, so, some pediatricians, it's beyond their scope of practice, and so when you're meeting with an adolescent pediatrician, when you can, that individual is trained and knowledgeable about puberty, particularly, and can really offer the child some support and guidance. Another thing is I would tell the teens is to have their questions ready when they go to the doctor, whoever it is, right? Write these questions down. And, when we process it, I would ask them, well, how was it? Do you feel like they answered your question? Sometimes they're like, I feel like I knew more than them. And I said, well, what would you like to do about that? Well, if I had my way, I would change my doctor. Okay, talk about it with your parent. They think about these things. They just know that because they're minors, they're usually not given the autonomy to make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you said that. And going back to something that you said earlier, before we wrap up, when we talk about, when a girl sees her period, you're entering womanhood. And I cannot finish this podcast, Cerene, without mentioning, growing up in the Caribbean, where the minute someone says, okay, I'm starting my period, the first thing sometime naturally, I'm not sure if that's what happens now, but, they talk about
not getting pregnant.
Yeah, not getting pregnant. Don't have sex. I'm glad you said it. See, even me, I'm getting a little bit scared to even say that out loud, but that's right. The stigma.
And have, that's usually, you can tell your viewers what that means.
Oh, she forced, right? Which means that she's fast and all these different things. But you know what? Periods are a natural, way of life, and that's why again, shameless plug here with my nonprofit. We're trying to provide that education so that, again, like you would have mentioned earlier, it's okay for these children or these adolescents to know that you can create your questions, take them to your doctor, and ask them. Or if you have that relationship where you can talk to your parents or a sibling or someone else in your family about these things, and do that. But what do you say to parents or guardians that have young girls who are seeing their period, instead of saying, oh, you're too fast, or won't get pregnant, don't have sex? Like, how can we have a healthy conversation about our period? Because again, it's normal. Of course, some people have different, types of cycle, which again, that's a whole different podcast that, other issues that cause that. But how can we, again, in a sense, remove the stigma, but as parents talking to those who are younger and seeing their period, how can we make it be more comfortable and more relaxing instead of just saying, oh, don't have sex or don't get pregnant? It's more to it than just that,
Right. I always pose questions, not always, but most times. And I would ask the parent or adult, what are your concerns? If I give you 2 to 3 spaces, aside from them being fast, tell me, what are your 2 to 3 concerns? And most times they're going to say, I'm scared they'll get pregnant. I'm scared they'll do what I did. Those are usually their concerns. And a lot of times parental anxiety impacts intelligence. I'm going to say that, right? And so because you're scared, and I have another half hour to an hour to talk to you about generational trauma. And how it's so rooted in that, and I'm just going to say shortly, if you go back, to slavery, and where young women, girls were raped, and they ended up pregnant. And can you imagine the fear a parent had when their child was taken from them, or their father when the child was taken from them, and then they see their belly growing? That is so traumatic, so painful. And then you have hundreds of years of being scared that a white kidnapper, because I don't call it master, because no one's anyone master, take your child. And then slavery is done. And the fear is still with us.
Yeah, no, that is true.
And we continue to blame, right? Even when, as adults, if you go back to slavery, I'm sure there was blaming. You know, it's because you had your period. It's because who can you couldn't go to the kidnapper and say you raped my child, because they may behead you or whip you to death. So you went to the person who was being raped or oppressed and blame and shame. And with that came from hiding, right?
Yeah.
Hiding a menstrual period opposed to being proud of it. I know in the U.S., and I wouldn't say, I couldn't say that that's still an issue now in Antigua and Barbuda in the Caribbean. I don't think it's something that has completely gone. I'm sure it's there in some cases, and even in the U.S., but and in African countries too. But in the U.S., you know, if you didn't have your period, you wasn't a young lady. Like, you haven't. It was your, you know, your rites of passage almost. You know, when I was in school, and I was a late bloomer, and you know, my breast didn't come in, and my period was late. And I was in every one of my class, not everyone, but most of them had a menstrual cycle.
That
and I'm like, gosh, like, I'm still a little girl.
Yeah.
I'm flat-chested and I have my period. So, you know, I hope that answered the question. But yeah, I would ask them questions before offering them information, because that's where mindfulness comes in, and awareness about what are these repeated thoughts that are occurring that are leading you to become so riled up and upset or blaming of this child when they have no control of it. And sometimes I may ask, well, do you know anyone that has had their period at a later age?
Right.
And some people are like, yeah. And I said, well, why do you think that happened? Do you think that they had sex at 13? No. Right. Oh, they said, well, that's the common age it's supposed to happen. And then I said, well, actually, you know, if it's 13 or 14, usually it's this age. I don't know if it has changed, but you can offer your view is that, but is it still 11, 12? Is it still that?
For when we have
it 10?
It's a little bit earlier. It's between 9 and 10.
Okay.
You know, from some of the research that I've done, it's getting earlier and earlier. Again, you know, our environment also plays a role.
Yes.
We're going to see so many changes as the time goes by. So who knows? But right now, it's between 9 and 10, you know.
Yeah. And so offering them that information, you know, it's imperative to helping them be aware. It's just not going to stop just because we offer the information, because if you've been living that way with that mindset, it takes a while, right?
Yes.
And so simultaneously also educating the child. So if they don't have any control over what their parent says, at least in their mind, they have the information, and they can hold on to feeling proud and knowing that they haven't done anything. And maybe they did. Maybe they did. Because let's not get it twisted. Some people, you know, some children may explore, you know, sex in some ways, at least in New York, that in schools, that's happening a lot. But having a conversation with them and educating them about that. And that goes into mental health again, right? You're aroused.
Yeah.
These emotions. I must love this person. And actually, it is a bodily function. Your body's preparing you to conceive. So you are going to be aroused. Your nipples are going to harden. Your vagina is going to have an intense feeling, physiological feeling, because you are preparing to conceive. That's what it's for. But then having an awareness of it and knowing like, okay, my menstrual cycle is coming.
Yeah.
I like him or her. And so let me, wait till this time has passed and see how I feel about them next week.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it at the end of the day, it comes down again to having the open conversation, not making it weird, as the young people would say, but making, removing that stigma again when it comes to talking about periods. And I think that's a responsibility that I personally have taken on, because again, I was one person who was ashamed to talk about periods. I don't know why. Every time I try to figure out why, I don't know. It's just that some things I think we just learn, while in school, like, oh, don't talk about periods, and some things it goes back to the biblical days as well. So definitely it's just about us having the conversations, like you would have mentioned, having the pediatric, the adolescent pediatrician, these different things, and encouraging our children to speak up, because the way this world is running, we have to ensure that our children out here are educated, so that way they can be empowered to make the right decision, however that may look for them, or at least they're not out here getting caught off guard, in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the underlying, that's one thing. And on that note, we will wrap this segment up. But Cerene, I want to know, because I know you have something really special happening in Antigua and Barbuda. So tell the listeners what's going on, where we can find you. Like, that's what's happening. What's happening in October?
Well, today, the next 2 weeks, you can find me in New York. But on in a couple of weeks, I will be back in Antigua and Barbuda. Myself, Orchard Blue Counseling Services, that the mental health company that I own, and 3 other NGOs, Antiguan-Women-owned NGOs in Antigua, Barbuda. We collaborated, and that is Odyssey Incorporated, Antigua and Barbuda, Chanel Imhoff, and Mental Health Talk Antigua. And so we came together to create Wadadli Wellness Expo. It is the first of its kind. And I'm going to say it's probably the first of its kind, maybe even in New York. Don't quote me, but because it's a holistic wellness expo. And so the mission is to promote holistic wellness for all in Antigua and Barbuda and those across the diaspora. And so holistic wellness, it encompasses all things you. So it encompasses your medical health, your mental health, your education, your spirituality, your religion, and cultural creative expression, right? These are all things that usually make up an individual and have a place and can integrate into someone to offer wellness. When you speak specifically about religion and spirituality, some clients, sometimes they think that they have to divorce, or they feel guilty for seeking mental health, because that means that their faith is weakened, that they are doing something wrong, or maybe even in their church or their mosque or temple where they go, they're viewed as someone who has lost their way because now they're seeking mental health. And that is not true. Yeah. Integrating all these things, they're here for a purpose. And so if you see a doctor for hypertension, diabetes, or prenatal care, then why not see someone for your mental health? This is part of your brain's functioning, right? Yeah. If you see a neurologist and you complain about these headaches, most neurologists would do what they call a mental status exam. A lot of people don't know that, because a neurologist is aware that emotional or traumatic experiences can offer some memory, conditions, even for those that have suffered from a stroke. So it's so important to maintain or connect with all things you. Our culture, as I was talking about, holistic practices. At the Wellness Expo, we're going to have specialists. So We're going to have an oncologist there, a neurologist, psychiatrist, counseling psychologist. I will be there. The members from Mental Health Talk Antigua will be there providing psychoeducation. We're going to also have holistic wellness professionals. So we have Humble and Free, if anyone knows who that is. Wadadli Wellness, who does yoga instruction and guidance. We're going to have Coca-Livity that has natural juices. We're having several other persons that I can't remember right now because I know we're wrapping up. So when you think about the things that you enjoy, it will be there, right? And also we're going to have speakers from JCI Antigua, from Breast Friends, because October is Cancer Awareness. And so we couldn't do it without having a cancer specialist oncologist and Breast Friends there. And so when we had reached out to some of these organizations, they said, well, what do we have to do with it? I said, well, like JCI Antigua, you're everything Antigua, right? People look forward to the JC Queen show, right? Or maybe they've thought about, how can I join this organization? How can I get involved? Am I even valuable enough to join, right? And so being able to be in those spaces among all these people, I wanted to say, I'm deserving of this. I'm deserving of more. I have abundance, and abundance is mine. And this is abundance. And so maybe an individual or parent may say, well, I can't afford this, but maybe I can afford this piece of it. Or maybe I can have it, or, go to see this doctor once a year, because I want to be real about the ability to access some of these things, because there aren't like several psychiatrists, or neurologists or oncologists in Antigua, or there may be a child there just seeing themselves in them, or the physician seeing themselves in the child, and they connect, and it plants a seed. All you have to do is plant a seed, and it will grow. And so your living environment or your circumstances does not necessarily define your future, but it will define you, because it will be part of your personality. And maybe some of those things you want to do away with, and some of those things you want to build on, right? And so I am a holistic psychotherapist, and I really encourage persons that even when they see me, I want to explore, like, what's going on with you? Have you been seeing the doctor? Have you gotten, when's the last time you had your GYN? And some clients were like, oh, I haven't had it in years. I'm like, well, girl, we going, yeah. I said, well, you're using health insurance with me, so what's stopping you seeing a gynecologist, right? And they're like, yeah, I never thought about that. I was like, let's get to it. When you're ready, schedule that appointment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Wadadli Wellness Expo is the 15th of October. It happens at the Department of Environment in Antigua and Barbuda from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. It is free. It is free to get in. We'll also have some giveaways for the first 50 people, first 50 families, or a single person to come in. There will be some giveaways. And the exhibitors, the vendors, they'll also be doing some giveaways. The doctors will be there to do a Q&A, so you can ask them questions. They'll be doing presentations. We also have Dr. Cerene King. How could I forget? She will be there. Dr. Therese Millette Joseph, she will be there. She is a counseling psychologist, and she will be there discussing mental wellness, holistic wellness. You may know her as having the podcast or even the Facebook page of Always a Queen, The Metamorphosis.
Yes.
And so, we're going to have a host of people that is known to Antigua and will be probably known for the first time. And again, this is for everyone. We don't care what your socioeconomic status is, your political affiliation, your gender, your sexuality, your religious affiliation, your spirituality. We do not care. What we do care is that you come and you share the information that you receive with others that maybe could not come there, or maybe were hesitant. And, I'm going to say I thank those in advance for coming. It takes courage because it's something that they've never heard of before. And I know sometimes we live in the scarcity, I kind of call it, where we're scared of things. And a lot of times those being scared or thinking that there's like an angle, so to speak, is because the system, right? Even in New York, the system may not have always presented or transparency for us, right? And in Antigua and Barbuda, the system is doing the best that they can, but sometimes just the knowledge of information may lend itself to someone that believing that things are not transparent. And so it is free. It's free. If you like to give 50 cents, by all means, give 50 cents. If you cannot give 50 cents and you want to hold on to that to buy something at the expo, please do, but please share the information. And I look forward to seeing you because guess who else is going to be there? Scrub Life Cares. I'm so excited. You all will be there. And that's so important to talk about period poverty, normalizing menstruation, and informing and educating children, teens, not only girls or female gender born, but also young men. They should know about menstruation and how to respect a woman's body and what that means. Yeah.
That's awesome stuff. I am looking forward to that event. I know it's going to be good. And like you heard Cerene, please do your best to come out because I know sometimes, again, this is not something that we're used to. So we're trying to remove or break that barrier as it relates to our wellness. We don't want to just be out here talking about, I'm on this wellness journey and not have the right information to begin and continue and be consistent with your journey. So definitely want to come out. The best part of it, it's free. When you get there, you feel like you want to give a donation, you definitely, again, that's up to you. That way we can continue to provide and keep doing the good work for the citizens of Antigua and Barbuda, and of course, not across the diaspora, because, we start that way, and then the goal may end up, who knows what happened next year,
And let me just add, if I can, where they can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Wadadli Wellness Expo. Wadadli Wellness Expo.
Yes. And I'll put it in the show notes as well. And I'll put I think there's an event. Is it Eventbrite link? I think.
It's on Eventbrite. Yes.
So I'll definitely put all that in the show notes. And, looking forward to seeing you guys there. Cerene, thank you so much. I know it's been a busy time in running your practice and then having to plan this event as well. So I definitely want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to me. It's always a pleasure. You're always so informative, always teaching me. I'm literally sitting here writing notes.
We're teaching one another, right? Yeah. I just got corrected the average age for menstruation now. So I just learned something.
So definitely want to thank you. And of course, we'd love to have you back in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you so much. And I appreciate this space. And I share it, on my social media platforms and others. And I can't wait to meet Scrub Life in real life because I haven't yet.
Yes, definitely. It's happening really soon.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.